A number arrived in 2025 that the Western chip equipment industry had spent years insisting could not arrive this soon. The same disclosure that announced it quietly drew a line around what it was willing to count. One document, read twice, against its own silences. The tally of China's domestic chip equipment adoption will be our text. The first reading gives us the momentum the record wants to establish. The second reading finds the ceiling the record declines to name. The headline figure the record states, domestically made tools reached approximately 35% of new equipment installations in 2025, described in the disclosure as ahead of the internal adoption target. That framing matters. The document is not reporting a catch-up. It is reporting an overperformance, and it wants the reader to feel the difference. The two leading local toolmakers are credited with driving this result, with at least one reporting revenue growth at strong double-digit rates over the measured period. The record names the momentum and attaches a number to it, which is more than most disclosures of this kind have been willing to do. For etch equipment and thin film deposition, the categories the record chooses to break out by name, the domestic share is reported above 40%. The document presents this as evidence that localization has moved beyond early-stage substitution, beyond the phase where homegrown tools fill only the least demanding positions in the line. A forward roadmap in the same disclosure promises dozens of tool types currently restricted by export controls will be produced domestically by the end of the decade. The record is not describing a pilot program. It is describing a campaign with a schedule. Taken at face value, the disclosure establishes that Applied Materials and Lam Research, whose strongest revenue exposure sits precisely in etch and deposition, are watching their addressable share of new Chinese installations contract in the exact categories the document highlights. The record shows real ground transferred. It does not hide that. What it does not do is tell you how much of that ground is the kind that was always going to be taken first, and how much of it is the kind that determines what a chip can actually do. The 35% figure is aggregate. The disclosure does not separate mature node equipment, where domestic toolmakers have been competitive for several years, from advanced node equipment, where the capability gaps remain widest. A single percentage that spans both process generations is doing a great deal of averaging, and the record does not say how much. An aggregate share that includes legacy nodes can reach 35%, while the advanced node share remains near zero. The document's choice to present a unified figure rather than a disaggregated one is itself information about what the disaggregated figure would show. The record knows how to break out a category when it wants to, because it broke out etch and deposition. It chose not to apply that same granularity everywhere. The disclosure singles out etch and deposition for the above 40% figures. It does not provide an equivalent breakdown for lithography. Lithography is the step that determines the minimum feature size a chip can reach. It is the category most directly constrained by export controls, and it is the category this disclosure most pointedly does not quantify. A document that celebrates process category granularity in 2 steps and then goes silent at the third is telling you something through its silence that it is not telling you in its text. The omission is not incidental to the record. It is the most consequential feature of the record. The disclosure does not say, at any level of granularity, how many of the domestically counted tools still rely on imported subsystems, laser sources, optical components, precision positioning stages, all of which are themselves subject to export restrictions or could become subject to them under an amended control regime. A tool assembled in China from restricted foreign subsystems is domestic in the sense this record uses the word. It is not domestic in the sense that matters when a new layer of controls tightens around the components rather than the finished tool. The adoption tally counts at the tool level. It does not count at the component level. Those are 2 different measurements of the same vulnerability, and the record presents only one of them. The forward roadmap, dozens of tool types to be localized by the decade's end, is a development promise. It is not a production record. The document presents it in the same section as the verified adoption figures, in the same declarative register, but it carries a different standing as evidence. The record does not distinguish between tools currently in qualification, tools in early development, and tools whose technical path has not yet been demonstrated in any public filing. A roadmap's silence about which milestones have been hit is not the same as evidence that all milestones are on track. The disclosure credits the promise without auditing it, and the two appear side by side, which is itself a choice the document made. 2/3 of Chinese chip equipment installations in 2025 were still sourced abroad. That is what the same 35% figure implies, stated plainly, and the record does not comment on it. The disclosure's framing is the ground won. Its silence is the ground that remains. Filling a tank to 35% is a matter of volume. Filling it the rest of the way, when what remains requires pressure, temperature, and purity that the first fraction did not demand, is a different engineering problem wearing the same arithmetic. The percentage points look identical on the gauge. The work behind them does not. The record does not say who compiled the adoption tally, or on what methodology, whether installations were self-reported by fabrication facilities, independently verified, or drawn from procurement filings. The document's authority is stated, not demonstrated. The disclosure covers new installations in 2025 and does not describe the installed base, the full population of equipment currently operating in Chinese fabrication facilities, which would carry a different domestic to foreign ratio, reflecting years of prior purchasing decisions. The record does not settle whether the double-digit revenue growth at the leading domestic toolmaker reflects genuine displacement of foreign competitors or growth driven by China's overall capacity expansion, in which foreign tools also grew in absolute terms. Nor does the disclosure say whether the above 40% figures in etch and deposition reflect leading-edge nodes in those process steps, or are weighted toward mature geometries, where domestic tools have been viable for longer. Each of these is another thing the record chose not to establish. Taken together, they mean that a close reading of this disclosure can confirm momentum without being able to confirm trajectory. The document is a snapshot that does not say precisely what it is a snapshot of. What the record establishes, read against what it withholds, is this. 35% is a real number representing real capability built under real supply pressure. The disclosure is not wrong to report it. But the same document that announces the third already won is the document that went silent on how the categories were separated, how the subsystems were sourced, and what the equivalent figure looks like when lithography is counted on its own. The restriction that produced the capability is in the text. The hardest part of the capability is in the margin. The count that stops at 35% does so at exactly the point where the counting would become inconvenient. The document we have not yet read closely is the export control filing that defines which subsystems are restricted at the component level rather than the tool level. If that language has already been drafted, the 35% figure may be due for a revision the fabrication facilities have not announced yet. If you want to be in the room when that text surfaces, the subscribe button is below, and notifications will make sure you do not miss the reading.